Daniel Whitmore woke up at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of his own breathing. Not his actual breathing, the breathing coming from the television across the room, the TV they'd turned off 3 hours earlier, the TV that was now showing footage of him sleeping from an angle that shouldn't exist. It was October 12th, 2019. He and his wife Sarah were spending the weekend at the Harrington Hotel in Portland, Oregon, a newly renovated boutique property in what used to be a rundown motor lodge. Room 304, freshly painted walls, clean sheets, nothing unusual, until the screen flickered. The timestamp in the corner read March 14th, 1987, over 30 years ago. And the room in the footage looked different. Older furniture, darker walls, wrong era, but it was the same room, the exact same layout, the same bed, and there was someone else in it. A woman, alone. Lying perfectly still under the covers, until she sat up slowly and turned her face directly toward the camera, toward them. Sarah grabbed his arm. The TV flickered again. The timestamp changed. October 12th, 2019. 3:52 a.m., 5 minutes ago. Now they were watching themselves. Same camera angle, same room. But the woman from 1987 was standing in the corner behind Sarah, translucent, flickering in and out of focus like a signal struggling to transmit. Daniel looked over his shoulder. The corner was empty. He looked back at the screen. The woman was closer now. What they discovered in the next 6 hours would unravel 32 years of missing persons, hidden surveillance, and a building that never stopped watching. If this keeps you up tonight, hit subscribe. You're going to need the company. The Harrington Hotel was never supposed to be memorable. Built in 1952 as a modest motor lodge on the outskirts of Portland, it catered to traveling salesmen and families passing through on their way to somewhere more important. By the 1980s, it had become the kind of place people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Weekly rentals, anonymous transactions, the type of establishment that asked no questions and expected none in return. In 2018, a development company purchased the property with plans to convert it into boutique accommodations. The renovation was extensive. They gutted the interiors, replaced the plumbing, tore down walls, and reframed the bones of each room. Only the external structure remained, the original concrete shell that had stood for nearly 70 years. By the time they reopened in spring 2019, the Harrington looked nothing like its former self. Clean lines, minimalist decor, a carefully curated aesthetic designed to erase any trace of what it had been. Daniel and Sarah Whitmore had no knowledge of this history when they booked room 304. They were both in their early 30s. Daniel worked in software development, Sarah taught middle school English, and they'd been together for 6 years. The trip was Sarah's idea. They'd been talking about getting away for months, something spontaneous and unplanned, and when she found a discount rate online, she booked it without researching further. They arrived on a Friday evening in mid-October. The lobby was quiet, staffed by a single young woman who checked them in with mechanical efficiency. The room was on the 3rd floor, accessible by a newly installed elevator that still smelled faintly of paint and industrial adhesive. When they opened the door to 304, everything appeared exactly as advertised. Queen bed with crisp white linens, flat-screen television mounted on the wall, small bathroom with subway tile and brushed nickel fixtures. They spent the evening as most couples do in hotel rooms, ordering takeout, scrolling through streaming options, talking about nothing in particular. Around 11, they turned off the lights. Sarah fell asleep quickly. Daniel lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a building settling around him. He didn't remember closing his eyes, but he remembered opening them. The television's glow illuminated the room in cold, blue light. Daniel's first instinct was irritation. He was certain they'd turned it off. He reached for the remote on the nightstand, but stopped when his eyes focused on the screen. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a channel. It was surveillance footage. The angle was high and stationary, looking down at a bed that occupied the same position as the one he was lying in. But the room in the footage was different. Darker walls, older furniture, a different era captured in the grain of the video quality. The timestamp in the corner read March 14th, 1987, 3:47 a.m., and there was someone in the bed. Daniel sat up slowly, careful not to wake Sarah. The figure in the footage was motionless at first, just a shape beneath covers. Then it moved, a small adjustment, the way someone shifts in sleep. The person appeared to be alone. "Sarah," Daniel whispered. She didn't stir. He watched the screen, transfixed, as the figure gradually sat upright. The camera quality made it difficult to discern features, but he could see it was a woman, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She remained still for several seconds, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond the frame. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her face toward the camera, toward him. Sarah woke to his hand on her shoulder, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Look," was all he said. But when she opened her eyes, the timestamp had changed. It now read October 12th, 2019, tonight. Sarah's first response was disbelief. "It's a prank," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "Someone in the hotel is messing with the TV system." But Daniel was already on his feet, checking the cables behind the television. Everything was connected normally, HDMI to the wall outlet, power cord secured. No external devices, no hidden cameras that he could see. He grabbed the remote and pressed every button. Nothing changed. The footage continued to play. On screen, the room, their room 32 years ago, sat empty now. The woman had vanished from the bed. The covers were disturbed, pulled back, but there was no sign of her. The timestamp continued to tick forward. 3:48 a.m., 3:49 a.m. Then, the timestamp jumped. October 12th, 2019. 3:52 a.m., the image flickered, and suddenly they were looking at themselves, same angle, same position, but current. Daniel standing beside the TV, Sarah sitting up in bed, her expression caught between confusion and fear. They were watching themselves being watched. Sarah scrambled backward against the headboard. "Turn it off! Daniel! Turn it off right now!" He tried. He pressed the power button, held it down, unplugged the TV entirely. The screen went black for exactly 3 seconds. Then it flickered back on, still showing the live feed of their room, still time-stamped with tonight's date. "We're leaving," Sarah said, already reaching for her phone. But when she unlocked it, there was no signal. No Wi-Fi connection, no cellular service. Daniel checked his own. Same thing. They were cut off. The television changed again. March 14th, 1987. 4:03 a.m. The room in the past was darker now, lit only by ambient light from somewhere beyond the frame. And there was movement, not in the bed, but near the door. A shadow crossed the threshold, paused, then moved toward the bathroom. The figure was indistinct, but clearly present. Someone else had entered. Daniel felt his pulse hammering in his throat. "What is this? What are we watching?" Sarah didn't answer. She was staring at the timestamp, her face pale. "That date," she said quietly. "March 14th, 1987. Google it. Use the hotel Wi-Fi if your phone—" "There is no Wi-Fi," Daniel interrupted. "There's nothing." But Sarah was already moving to her laptop, which she'd left on the small desk near the window. When she opened it, the hotel's network appeared immediately. Strong signal, no password required. She typed quickly, her fingers shaking slightly. The search results loaded. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A woman disappeared from this hotel on March 14th, 1987. Her name was Evelyn Marsh. She checked in alone. They found her car in the parking lot 3 days later, but she was never seen again." The television flickered. Back to October 12th, 2019. Back to them. But now the angle had shifted slightly, not the same camera position. This was from somewhere else in the room, somewhere lower. And in the corner of the frame, partially obscured by the bathroom doorway, was a shape that hadn't been there before. It looked like a person standing just out of sight. Daniel moved without thinking, crossing to the bathroom in 3 quick steps. He hit the light switch. The small space was empty. Toilet, sink, mirror reflecting his own frightened expression back at him. But when he turned back to the room, Sarah was pointing at the screen. "Look," she said. On the television, in the live feed of their room, the bathroom light was off, and the shadow in the doorway had moved closer to the bed. Daniel's hand was still on the light switch. The bathroom was still illuminated, but on screen, in the version of reality the television was showing them, everything was different, and the timestamp was now ticking backward. Sarah slammed the laptop shut and stood up. "We're getting out. Now! We'll go to the front desk. We'll call the police. I don't care. We're leaving this room." But when Daniel reached for the door handle, it wouldn't turn. Not locked. He could rotate the mechanism freely, but the door itself wouldn't open. It was as if something on the other side was holding it closed, pressing back with equal force against every attempt to pull it inward. "Help me," he said, and Sarah joined him, both of them yanking on the handle with everything they had. The door didn't budge. It didn't even rattle in the frame. Behind them, the television brightened. They turned simultaneously. March 14th, 1987. 4:17 a.m. The footage showed Evelyn Marsh, it had to be her, backing away from something in the room. She was visible now. Her face caught in profile as she retreated toward the corner farthest from the door. She was wearing a nightgown, her arms raised defensively in front of her. Her mouth was open as if she was speaking or screaming. But there was no audio, just the silent documentation of her terror. And then she looked directly at the camera, not just toward it, at it, as though she could see through time, through the lens, straight into room 304 in 2019. Her expression changed from fear to something else, desperation, pleading. The timestamp jumped forward, March 14th, 1987, 4:23 a.m. Evelyn was gone. The room was empty. The covers on the bed were undisturbed now, as if she'd never been there at all. But there was something on the floor near the bathroom, a dark stain spreading across the carpet. Too black in the low light to identify, but unmistakably liquid. "Jesus Christ," Daniel breathed. "They recorded it. Someone recorded what happened to her." Sarah's mind was racing. "The renovation," she said. "When they gutted this place, they found something. They had to have found something. Cameras hidden in the walls and the ceiling. This footage didn't just appear from nowhere." She returned to her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled up everything she could find about the 2018 renovation. News articles, permits, contractor reports filed with the city. Most of it was mundane. Routine construction updates, budget overruns, standard delays. But there was one detail that caught her attention. In November 2018, 3 months before the hotel reopened, the construction crew had reported finding obsolete surveillance equipment embedded in the walls of multiple rooms. The article was brief, barely 2 paragraphs in a local business journal. The equipment had been removed and disposed of, according to the project manager. An investigation had been opened to determine who had installed it and when, but the article ended there. No follow-up, no resolution. "They found cameras," Sarah said, turning the laptop toward Daniel. "Hidden cameras from decades ago. Someone was recording guests without their knowledge." The television changed again. October 12th, 2019, 4:19 a.m. They were back in the present, watching themselves on screen. But the angle was different now. Not from above, not from the corner, but from somewhere behind the headboard, looking directly at where Sarah stood with her laptop. And on screen, just barely visible in the shadows behind her, was a figure. Daniel grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her away from the bed. They both turned to look at the actual wall behind the headboard. Nothing. Just wallpaper and paint. But on the television, the figure was moving closer. Sarah's voice was shaking. "Whatever is showing us this, it's not just playing footage. It's using the cameras that are still here, still watching, still recording." "Why?" Daniel demanded, as if the room itself might answer. "What does it want?" The television went black for exactly 3 seconds. Then it showed them something that made Sarah cover her mouth. The screen displayed a grid, 4 separate camera feeds, each showing a different room in the Harrington Hotel. All from March 14th, 1987, all time-stamped within minutes of each other. Room 304, Evelyn Marsh's room, was in the upper left. The other 3 showed different spaces: room 307, room 215, and what appeared to be a utility closet on the ground floor. In each frame, there was a person. Different ages, different genders, all alone. And in each frame, something was wrong. In room 307, a man in his 50s sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, statue still, for several seconds before the timestamp jumped forward and showed the room empty. In room 215, a younger woman stood at the window, her palm pressed against the glass. She remained in that position for nearly a minute before stepping backward out of frame. When the camera angle adjusted, as if the lens itself could move, she was gone. The utility closet showed only darkness at first, but as their eyes adjusted, Daniel and Sarah could make out a figure crouched in the corner. The person's face was turned away from the camera, but their shoulders were shaking. Crying, maybe. Or laughing. It was impossible to tell. "This isn't about Evelyn," Sarah whispered. "She wasn't the only one." The grid disappeared, replaced by a single feed. Room 304 again, but a different date. June 2nd, 1991. A man this time, middle-aged, sitting at the desk where Sarah's laptop now rested. He was writing something, a letter perhaps, his hand moving frantically across the paper. The timestamp accelerated, minutes passing in seconds. And the man never stopped writing. His hand moved and moved until the page was full. Then he started on another, and another. Then he stood up, walked to the bathroom, and closed the door. The timestamp continued forward. 11:47 p.m., 11:48 p.m. The bathroom door stayed closed. 11:53 p.m. The door opened. The room was empty. "Where did he go?" Daniel said, his voice tight. "There's no other way out of the bathroom. Where did he—" The television cut to black again, but this time a message appeared in white text. "They never left." Sarah made a small sound in the back of her throat. Daniel stepped closer to the screen, squinting at the words as if getting nearer might reveal some hidden meaning. "What does that mean?" he asked. "They're still here? In the building?" The text disappeared, replaced by another feed. October 12th, 2019, 4:27 a.m. Their room, but not from any angle they'd seen before. This camera was inside the wall, looking out through what must have been a tiny gap in the construction. A crack, a hole, something the renovation crew had missed. And through that gap, they could see themselves. Daniel standing near the TV, Sarah beside the bed, both of them frozen, staring at the screen. But there was something else in the frame. Behind them, just barely visible in the reflection of the dark window glass, was the outline of a person. Not solid, more like a double exposure, a translucent overlay. The figure was standing between them and the door, motionless. They both spun around. The room was empty. Just the two of them, the furniture, the locked door. Daniel turned back to the screen. The figure in the reflection was clearer now. It was a woman. Her features were obscured, but her posture was unmistakable. The same defensive stance, arms raised, head tilted as if listening. Evelyn Marsh. And then they heard it. Not from the television, from somewhere inside the walls. A sound like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. Scratching, searching, trying to get out. The scratching continued for 7 seconds, then stopped. In the silence that followed, Daniel could hear his own breathing, Sarah's rapid pulse visible in the vein at her throat. They stood perfectly still, waiting for the sound to return, but the room offered nothing. Just the hum of the television and the distant mechanical groan of the building's climate system. Sarah moved first, approaching the wall where the sound had originated. She pressed her palm against the surface, feeling for vibrations, hollow spaces, anything that might explain what they'd heard. The wall was solid, newly finished drywall over the original structure. "The cameras," she said, thinking aloud. "They didn't remove all of them. They couldn't have. These feeds are live. We're seeing ourselves in real time, which means the equipment is still active, still embedded somewhere in the building." Daniel's engineering mind began to process the implications. Wireless transmission, probably. Battery-powered or connected to the building's electrical system. But that doesn't explain the footage from 1987. That would have required physical media, tapes, hard drives, something that could be discovered. "Unless it wasn't supposed to be discovered," Sarah said. "Unless someone wanted it preserved." She returned to her laptop, pulling up the search results about Evelyn Marsh. The original missing person report was available through a digitized newspaper archive. Evelyn had been 32 years old, a freelance photographer from Seattle, in Portland for a commercial shoot. She'd checked into the Harrington Hotel alone on March 13th, 1987, planning to stay for 3 nights. The hotel staff reported that she'd returned to her room around 10 p.m. on March 14th and was never seen again. Her belongings remained in the room: clothes, camera equipment, wallet, but Evelyn herself had vanished. The case went cold after 6 months. No body, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play beyond her inexplicable disappearance. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist within the confines of room 304. "What if she didn't leave because she couldn't?" Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if whatever happened to her is still happening?" The television flickered. A new message appeared. "Watch." The screen split into 2 feeds, side by side. On the left, March 14th, 1987, 11:47 p.m. Evelyn Marsh sitting on the bed, looking toward the bathroom. On the right, October 12th, 2019, 4:34 a.m. Daniel and Sarah in the present, watching the screen. In the 1987 feed, Evelyn stood and walked toward the bathroom. The angle followed her. The camera could move, Daniel realized with growing unease, tracking her movements as she opened the door and stepped inside. The bathroom light was on. She was visible in the mirror above the sink, her reflection perfectly clear. Then the light went out. Not gradually, instantly, as if someone had cut the power. The 1987 feed showed only darkness where Evelyn had been standing. The timestamp continued forward. 11:48 p.m., 11:49 p.m. The darkness didn't change. In the 2019 feed, their bathroom light was still on. Daniel had left it on after checking earlier. But as they watched, the light in their bathroom began to flicker. Not the irregular pulse of a failing bulb, but deliberately. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. A pattern. SOS. Sarah grabbed Daniel's hand. She's trying to communicate. After 32 years, she's still trying to get help. The flickering stopped. Both feeds on the television went black. Then a new image appeared. A schematic. Floor plans of the Harrington Hotel dated 1952, original construction blueprints, and marked in red throughout the building, behind walls, above ceiling tiles, beneath floorboards, were dozens of small symbols. Camera positions. "Oh God," Daniel breathed. This entire building was designed for surveillance, from the beginning. Every room, every hallway. Whoever built this place built it to watch people. The schematic remained on screen for 30 seconds before dissolving into one final feed. October 12th, 2019, 4:41 a.m. The camera was positioned somewhere they hadn't seen before, outside room 304 in the hallway, looking at their door. And the door was opening. On screen, they watched themselves emerge from the room. First Sarah, then Daniel, backing away from something inside that the camera couldn't capture. They moved quickly toward the elevator, pressed the call button, waited. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. The doors closed. But Daniel and Sarah were still in the room, still standing beside the bed, watching this impossible version of events play out. "That hasn't happened," Sarah said. "We haven't left. We're still here." The television went black. Then, for the first time, sound emerged, not from the speakers, but from within the walls. A voice distorted by decades of decay and distance, but unmistakably human, unmistakably female. "He's still watching. He never stopped. Get out while you can." The door to room 304 clicked. Daniel grabbed the handle and pulled. This time, it opened. The hallway beyond was empty, lit by emergency exit signs at either end. They didn't hesitate. They ran. In the lobby, the young woman from check-in was gone, replaced by a night manager who looked confused by their disheveled appearance and frantic demands to check out immediately. He processed their early departure without argument, perhaps accustomed to guests leaving in the middle of the night for reasons they didn't want to explain. Daniel and Sarah didn't speak until they were in their car, pulling out of the parking lot. Only then did Sarah look back at the building. Room 304's window was on the third floor, dark except for the cold blue glow of a television that was still on. They filed a police report the next morning. An investigation was opened into the hidden surveillance equipment, and within 2 weeks, authorities discovered what the renovation crew had either missed or deliberately overlooked: a sophisticated network of cameras embedded throughout the building's original structure, all connected to a central recording system hidden in a sealed-off section of the basement. The system had been installed in 1952 by the hotel's original owner, a man named Robert Harrington, who had died in 1994. His personal archives, discovered in a storage unit after the investigation went public, contained hundreds of hours of footage, guests in private moments, conversations, intimate encounters, all recorded without consent over 4 decades. Among the footage was the complete recording of March 14th, 1987. What happened to Evelyn Marsh? The police didn't release details, but they confirmed that her remains were found within the structure of the building itself, concealed during a renovation in 1988, a renovation that Robert Harrington had personally overseen. The Harrington Hotel closed permanently in December 2019. The building was demolished in early 2020, but the footage remains, archived as evidence, a digital monument to the victims of a man who believed observation was ownership. Daniel and Sarah never stayed in another hotel. They never discussed what the television showed them that night, beyond their statements to police. But Sarah kept one thing, a screenshot of the message that appeared before they left. They never left, because, in a sense, they hadn't. Evelyn Marsh, the man in room 307, the woman in room 215, everyone who disappeared within those walls, their final moments captured and preserved, trapped in an endless loop of surveillance, unable to escape, unable to be forgotten. Some places remember everything, and some places, if they're designed carefully enough, if the person behind the lens is patient enough, never let you leave at all. If you stayed until the end, ask yourself, in how many places have you been watched without knowing it? How many rooms have you walked through that remembered you? Hit like if this story got under your skin, and subscribe, because the places we think are empty rarely are. Sweet dreams.